in the not-too-distant future, following the rapid succession of World Wars III and IV, plus the hidden horrors of secret World War II. There's not much left. All that remains is a place where folks get together to read and discuss comic books. Sometimes they laugh, sometimes they argue, but they always record and upload their transmissions. You have found one of those transmissions today. Welcome to the last comic shop.
Hey, hey! It is now time for more of the Last Comic Shop! And I'm the host with the most, Andy Larson, and welcome back to another great week of our fantastic broadcast. And of course, as always, I'm joined by the wonderful co-host, J.A. Scott. Now, J.A., on today's program, we're going to be talking about Swamp Thing. It's actually your pick. Like, you decided that we were going to read some Swamp Thing this week. Are you a fan of Swamp Thing? Why did you pick Swamp Thing?
I picked it because I had never read it. And I know that Alan Moore had quite the run on Swamp Thing, and it's well received by the comic reading public. So I wanted to read it and see what all the talk is about.
Well, I will say this, sir, that of all the comic book characters you could pick, boy, howdy, did you pick one that I've just never, ever been able to get into. Like, just as a kid, I remember, like, there were Swamp Thing toys, there was a Swamp Thing USA show, there was even a Swamp Thing cartoon. And other than the awesomely bad theme song of Swamp Thing, you are amazing! And I don't know, they were riding around on dune buggies or something.
And they had a play set for the toys where you would have a little slab and you'd put your human character on the slab and then you'd flip it over and the little bug man would come out and he's turned into a bug.
And that's my other co-host, Chad Smith. But what I was going to ask was, I said this was a character I was never able to get to until he was widely popular. And so I was going to put it to my co-hosts here. What is one character that is fairly popular or well-known among comic book circles, but you've just never been able to get into?
That's pretty easy. It's for me, it's Green Lantern. Maybe he was okay when he was part of Justice League here and there, but to me, Green Lantern is perfectly encapsulated by the Green Lantern movie. Just useless. Why? What's the point?
And that's surprising because, honestly, he's one of those cosmic characters, and typically you like the cosmic characters. Like, you know, at least at Marvel, you were all about, like, folks like, you know, Silver Surfer and Guardians of the Galaxy and Thanos and all those things. And that's kind of DC's equivalent. Any reason why you're like, when it comes to Green Lantern, yet you like the other cosmic characters?
I don't know. I just could never get into him. I never read a story that was memorable with Green Lantern. I think I always had issues with kind of like the whole power set and the ring, and he wasn't very interesting of a character. The other Green Lantern Corps characters, the other aliens, were much more interesting than him.
That's true.
Give me some Guy Gardner, some Gnort.
Yeah. It is true. Hal Jordan is pretty white bread. He's pretty dull as they come. Now, Chad, what's your pick?
Oh, man. Well, Jay stole my answer. I was going to say Green Lantern, but I'm just going to go with Jeff Johns.
Wow!
He's the guy who did that whole Blackest Night story. Mm-hmm. You know, we're like, oh, look, all the superheroes are zombies. And I read it, and I was like, And then he's really well known for his Flash run that, you know, people love. And, like, I read it, I was like, Can we have Mark Waid again? And a lot of people love Jeff Johns. And by the way, he worked on that Green Lantern movie, J.A. But it's never connected with me. I've never read a Jeff Johns story that I was like, wow, that was really good. And so I'm going to say Jeff Johns.
Fair enough. Well, one person also, another comic book creator we have on today's program is the wonderful Pittsburgh-based Mikey Wood. And glad to have you back on the show, Mikey.
Yay!
So throwing the question out to you, is there a particular character that you never really could get behind?
You guys are going to murder me for saying this, but mine is Spider-Man. I know. I know you guys are big Spider-Man guys. Short of like a handful of stories, which like Spider-Man Blue is good, but that team could do no wrong in my mind.
Yeah.
I mean, Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale, like everything they do is they make me give a damn about characters that I never imagined giving a damn about. Which is like Spider-Man. That Spider-Man Blue is glorious, but Spider-Man Reign, which apparently everybody like the Dark Knight Returns version of Spider-Man, which I really dug.
The one with the radioactive stuff.
Yeah, which is silly, but it makes plenty of sense too at the same time if you think about it. But I've never been able to get into him in long. I mean, there's a lot of characters. Fantastic Four is the same way, and I just couldn't get into them. But Spider-Man's the shocking one because everybody loves Spider-Man, and I'm just kind of like, eh.
Well, you bring up a good point. I mean, I have been a lifelong Spider-Man fan, and I still have a soft spot for the old web swinger for sure. But I will say that as I've grown older, the shine has come off of Spider-Man a little bit for me. I remember when I was a teenager, obviously Spider-Man was my bread and butter. But as I've grown older, like Spider-Man continued to be somebody that was in his late 20s, and he wasn't, he was married maybe to Mary Jane or had Mary Jane as a girlfriend, but he never was able to progress. He was never able to have kids. He was never able to move on out of that, everyone. And now they've even de-aged him a little bit more by giving you the Miles Morales version. So like, I feel like the older I get, the less I have in common with Peter Parker. Like it is like, I have more in common now with Reed Richards, genuinely just being a dad. Like I can relate more. I have a beard now. Like I'm a grown ass man. So like, it is what it is. Not that I'm a dick. I mean, some of my co-hosts might say that from time to time, but I don't know. That's just the way I feel. I know Chad is evergreen when it comes to Spider-Man, and
Oh yeah. See, I won't lie to you. It's been a rough decade or so. We had that whole Dan Slott era. Not a big fan. But for me, there's something about Spider-Man, the essence of Spider-Man, where if you go back to those first 100 issues, especially the first 38 when Ditko was there, when Spider-Man aged in real time, like there was so much growth and development that happened to those. Those I can go back to time and time again. There's something about his personality that's always relatable for me. So he's the everyman. He's the guy who has the problems no matter what. He's the guy who, no matter how great they try to make him, he still screws everything up. I don't know. As somebody who is really great but screws everything up pretty much all the time, I can really relate to Spider-Man.
J.A., thoughts on Spider-Man real quick?
Well, he's just not as powerful as Silver Surfer, so what's the
That's right.
Well, one character that's not as powerful as Silver Surfer either is the Swamp Thing, and we're going to be reviewing some Alan Moore Swamp Thing, Saga-ish, almost. Any case, we'll be right back with more of that review right after these messages, so stay tuned.
If I ever did a Silver Surfer, like, he'd have silver business. Like, he would just be...
Hey, this is Ken M.
Padawan J.
Coach Duffy from the Ocho Duro Parlay Hour podcast. Every week, the ODPH is talking sports, movies, TV, comics, and more. It's always a parlay of topics on each episode. You can find the ODPH on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, and wherever you find great podcasts, such as the one you're listening to right now. Don't forget to check out OchoDuroParlayHour.com, where you can find the links to all of the ODPH social media accounts, links to the bands whose music you hear each week on the show, hashtag 607 podcast info, and parlay points, our companion blog section of the show. Thanks for listening to the ODPH. Now get back to your regularly scheduled podcast.
All right, we're back with more of The Last Comic Shop. And on today's program, we're going to be doing an Alan Moore book. I think it's the first Alan Moore book that we've done on this particular show, which is, we've talked about him from hell and how long that was and how we didn't want to do that on this show for sure. But what we did do on this show is Saga of the Swamp Thing, which is actually fairly popular in terms of Alan Moore's work. I personally would put it in that kind of tier with things like V for Vendetta and Watchmen, obviously. But I think that those are kind of like Alan Moore books that everybody seems to know and has been adapted at least several times. I mean, as recently as last year when that DC streaming service program came out.
I was going to chime in too. I think he elevated the character of Swamp Thing, because I know when I talk to people that are fans of the horror comics and the horror genre, like inevitably they talk about how great Swamp Thing is.
Yeah.
There's just a certain, demographic where Alan Moore put him on the map, but that's been enough to sustain the character through, and he has other really good stories that come on every now and again, but really, people always just go back to the Alan Moore stuff.
Right, and plus the fact that, like, he really did lay the groundwork, which would eventually become Vertigo. Like, you don't have Saga of the Swamp Thing and a couple other books, maybe you don't get Vertigo. I don't know, but he sets the tone with what Vertigo would eventually become for DC. So very, very important stuff here in Saga the Swamp Thing. And Chad, other than Alan Moore, who worked on this particular collection?
This is book 1. It's been collected as. It's issues numbers 20 through 27. I've got Alan Moore picking up from, I think it was Marty Pascal.
I actually think it's criminal that Marty's issues are sort of ignored. You know, like, you don't start volume 1 of collections with issue 20. You know, like, as much as I love Alan Moore's thing, Marty's Swamp Things were good. And he just passed away within the last 2 years. And he was on my Facebook a lot. He was a good guy. But anyway.
I heard a lot of interviews with him. He's very energetic. And, like, he's worked on so many different things, too. So that's
everything.
The art tours are shared between Stephen Bissette and John Totleben, Dan Day and Rick Bike. Colors by Tarjana Wood. And John Costanza and Todd Klein, who are those Vertigo letterers.
So anyways, this was J.A.'s pick for this particular week. He wanted to read a DC book, and he wanted to read Swamp Thing. So he gets the honor of doing the 10-cent synopsis, as always. So what happens in these 8 issues of Saga of the Swamp Thing, J.A.?
Okay, so this is really Alan Moore's retconning, reimagining of what Swamp Thing is and was as a character. He really, in these 8 issues, he lays the groundwork for everything that would come after this within Swamp Thing and then the greater universe. I think John Constantine was created a couple issues after this run that we didn't actually read. But essentially, Swamp Thing up until this point had been a man that became this human swampy thing. And Alan Moore retcons that to be that the man is dead and Swamp Thing is just a vegetable creation that has been imbued with this guy's memories and thoughts, but is not the man itself. So it ends the idea that the Swamp Thing will become a man again because he never was a man. He was always just a vegetable, always just being plantation. And there's a couple of issues where Swamp Thing has a mini breakdown and he goes through a crisis where he's trying to get over the fact that he's no longer human, or he never was human. So there's no hope to becoming human again, which brings up some really cool, interesting ideas about, what it is to be human, what is humanity, what are thoughts, all these things. And then, of course, because it's Swamp Thing, you're dealing with issues of the environment and the nature of the relationship between humans and plants, and that we need each other. And then towards the end, he introduces some demons, and you get into stuff that you can see he's planting the seeds of what would become like John Constantine and some of his other famous characters that would show up. I think Constantine comes in like issue 35, so we weren't far off. That's my $1.50 synopsis.
Well, Mikey, do you want to give us your 10-cent synopsis? Since, again, it's like with Essex County, where like J.A. picks the book, but then we bring somebody on the show that likes it even more than he does.
It's not easy being in the green. That's basically. And John Constantine is actually in one panel of one of these issues. I can't remember exactly what issue it is, but he's standing after the guy is impaled by the sea or by the swordfish. John Constantine is standing in a crowd next to Abby Arcane. So that's technically the first appearance of John Constantine, although it's not. They don't say that, but that's who it is.
Neat.
Yeah, man, I love Swamp Thing and Man Thing too. Depending upon who's writing him, and if it's covered in vegetation, I just love it. I like every era of Swamp Thing, but when Alan Moore came in, basically the idea is that instead of it being a man who thinks he's a plant, it's a plant who thinks he's a man. So he manages to retcon everything, but still keep everything at the same time. Especially issue 20 it's called Loose Ends, and it really is loose ends. It's tying up a lot of stuff that happened in the prior few issues of Marty Pasco's run. And everybody, because of the movies and because of the cartoon, associates Dr. Arcane with Swamp Thing as his main villain. But Arcane at least first volume entirely, he's not even there. He's an element that was there, and he's a haunt, but the Floronic Man is really the villain of this one for the most part.
Right.
So
yeah, so I'll kick it off with my particular initial thoughts, because this is now like the fourth or fifth time that I've read this particular book. And I will say that I have never read book 2, book 3, or any other Swamp Thing other than this particular book. And again, I think Mikey Wood hit on one of the reasons why I never got into Swamp Thing is because I'm more of a Man-Thing guy. I like Steve Gerber. People know that I like Steve Gerber, and I like Steve Gerber when he writes Man-Thing. So if I'm going to pick my hulking, rotting sack of vegetation, I'm going to go with Man-Thing more often than not. But this particular book, I can remember the first time I read it, I was like 20 years old, and I have an older brother who has always been kind of like my comic mentor. And one day he said, "You know what your problem is? You're reading a lot of shit." And I said, okay. And so he threw down this particular book on my bed, and he's like, "You read this. This is good." And the first issue, I was like, meh. But then I got to Anatomy Lesson, Swamp Thing 21. That's by far one of the best single issues that I've ever read of comic books, and I still stand by that. You know, basically, if you could cut everything else out of Swamp Thing, you could just provide Anatomy Lesson and just say, yeah, read this, and that's all you need to know about Swamp Thing. I think you're okay with that.
Yeah.
Because honestly, it not only flips the script on a particular character, but does it in such a way that it's really hard to ever think of that character the same way again. And the pacing and the plotting of that particular issue and the buildup and the tension as like he thaws out of the ice and so it's just gorgeous. And everything else after that with the Floronic Man is tremendous. And you get through those 5 issues with the Floronic Man, and then you get to the thing with the Monkey King, and I'm like, I'm off. Even though Etrick and the Demon's there, and I love that from Jack Kirby, I'm off. And so those are my initial thoughts of this particular book. I love those 5 issues. I think that is the greatest Swamp Thing story ever, but do I ever have to read any other Swamp Thing? No.
Says the guy who's never read any other Swamp Thing. How do you know?
That's true. Go ahead.
So it's tons of fun, especially when you consider it in the context of when it came out. You're talking about the early to mid 80s when you really started to have these eco warriors out there and people starting to really care about the planet and you know, broadcast that loudly. And then you have this representative, this, you know, he's like the senator from the Green, you know, and it's something has such a cool look to him. And I will be the first to confess, my comic reading, I tend to lean more towards superheroes than horror books and things of that nature. But when you read Swamp Thing, when you read this book, it's an experience. And there's all kinds of like just weird, neat little thought processes, and a lot of them have been matriculated out into other forms, but you know it came here first. There's so much of this that, you know, I just respect Moore's writing and the ideas behind, you know, instead of making him a man who turns into a plant, he's a plant that has engulfed this man, that's become part of this collective unconscious. I think that's super fascinating. I think it's really gross how he grows those tubers, and I don't ever want to see or experience those tubers, even though I have read the issues where Abby gets to taste a tuber of her own, and that turns into something real weird and neat looking. I gotta stay away.
Makes you look at carrots a different way.
Yeah. But no, and I always go back to the look of Swamp Thing himself. It's just such a cool looking, earthy monster. Like, I dig it.
J.A., now, this is the first time that you've read this particular... I'm saving Mikey for last, by the way, and that's on purpose, because I feel like he's got a lot to say. Now, this is the first time that you read this particular book. What are your initial thoughts? As, like, again, did it kind of move you the way that it did me the first time I read it?
Yeah, so Loose Ends, the first chapter, did feel like, okay, where is this going? Wrapping up everything from the earlier run, as Mikey said. After all those loose ends got tied up, Anatomy Lesson was just an eye-opener for me, an eye-opener for the character, and then the following story with the Floronic Man was just wow. I was blown away by that. The darkness of it, the inner turmoil of people's thoughts and what they were dealing with. The thing I found most jarring was the covers. The covers were still like, 1970s, 1980s fun comic covers. But then inside, the actual what was going on. Like the Floronic Man is sealing people in their homes and having the plants put out oxygen so that they blow up and explode with fire.
And don't forget the flush spray can.
Yeah. Is there any more disturbing scene than that last Floronic Man gets kicked out of the green and he goes back and he's like, I gotta pretend I'm a human. And the Justice League finds him and he's like, his bark's been grown out and his arm's broken and he's like, I'm just a human like everybody else. And I'm just like, no, sir, you are nowhere near human right now. That is nasty.
Yeah. That's such a great panel where Superman's put his cape over the guy's shoulders and he's like talking to Green Lantern. So Arkham for him. Yeah. Arkham.
Yeah. Jay just mentioned the Justice League appearing at the tail end of Floronic Man little 4-issue thing or 5-issue thing. The way Moore handles those superheroes even is amazing. You know, when he talks about how there's a city in the sky and all of these things, and then the Floronic Man says they'll be here soon. They drop from the sky. They always drop from the sky. Like it makes him seem so much more otherworldly. And when they mention that, you know, when Green Arrow, of course, in character, as Green Arrow would, mentions how, hey, we watch New York and we watch Metropolis and we watch Gotham, but nobody watches over these people, you know, and that's something that Green Arrow really would say, because he's like, he was the original social justice warrior, that Green, you know, all superheroes are social justice warriors, which drives me crazy about modern comic fans saying otherwise. I don't know what comics they read, maybe just Punisher, but there you go. Because Swamp Thing prior to this was very much like, you know, like a Frankenstein-y kind of monster of the week sort of comic. I don't want to downplay anything, you know, that people did beforehand. But the Saga series, Saga of the Swamp Thing, came out in a weird sort of publishing way. The first issue they published was an annual. They published Saga of the Swamp Thing annual #1 before there was even a series. And that was an adaptation of the movie that came out at the time.
With Adrienne Barbeau?
With Adrienne Barbeau, yeah, and Dick Durock in a diving suit, you know, which I love for what it is. It's a B movie and it should be. But the revival came and Marty Pascal worked on the first, 19 issues. But yeah, you're right. If you want the essence of what Swamp Thing is, reading the anatomy lesson is really like a great primer for what's left. But after that, I mean, you're talking hundreds more issues, Andrew. Like there are some phenomenal Swamp Thing stories, and there's some that aren't. I mean, just like everything else. But for the 7 issues that we read, it's the first time I ever read a comic that was considered a horror comic, quote unquote, that actually creeped me out.
Yeah, I was just that Floronic Man kissed that town by having the plants lock everybody inside. The sheriff who's watched the video and has gone back to his house and is chopping down this tree and burning his yard and taking all the house plants out. That's just awesomely grotesque. But what you mentioned about the superheroes, another thing I really liked, you have Justice League looking down and they're like, what's going on? The Floronic Man, he always loses. Why are we caring about this? He never wins. And then they're like, well, can we do this? No, that won't work. Can we do this? No, that won't work. And it ends up, they're completely powerless. All these great superheroes in their citadel in the sky can't do anything to stop this. And it ends up being Swamp Thing. And he doesn't do it by might and right. He does it by convincing the guy that his thought processes are wrong and basically makes him crazy.
They definitely tap into that Carl Jungian, the collective unconscious, and turn it on its head. And it's in the earth, it's in the green, and it's all connected, and it's, very spiritual almost, and that's what it makes it extra creepy, because you're like, I can kind of feel this stuff happening. You go outside, you connect with nature, and then it turns out the nature is a force called the green, and there's this giant tuber guy. But the question I wanted to ask is, and especially Mikey, since you're such a Swamp Thing devotee, did you like it more once he was fully Vertigoized and kind of off in his own Vertigo universe, where he didn't have the superheroes to play off with? Because when the superheroes show up here, I'm like, it's kind of garish. Jay pointed out very rightly so that, they don't fit here. This doesn't fit into that paradigm of the superhero showing up and punching somebody in the jaw and saving the day. And Alan Moore's, he has the Justice League sitting there, like, is there anything we can do? And they're like, I guess not.
Well, it's weird because like I think Andrew mentioned that, but it gave birth to like Hellblazer. Oh my God, and even Sandman in a way.
They had superheroes there too in the first couple issues, and it's like
And Alan Moore even uses them later on too. There's a whole issue where they all travel to hell and all this other stuff, and the Justice League is with them, but it shows superheroes out of their elements, for lack of pun intended, I suppose, elements, animal, vegetable, mineral, but it shows them out of their elements in situations that they don't necessarily know how to. And in the scene where they're discussing things where Superman's like, I can count every oxygen atom in the air if you want me to, and they're trying Firestorm's like, no, don't bother with that. They're all trying to figure out how to defeat him because Floronic Man, prior to this, like I think he debuted in like the first Silver Age Atom issue, if I remember correctly, and like he was just this kind of throwaway vegetable guy. So when Vertigo came around, when the subprint came around, and they sort of took a step away from it and separated themselves from it, the stories were still really good. So yeah, I quite enjoyed it. And the superhero element is such a weird inclusion, and you're right, it feels so out of place, but they play it that way. Like in Sandman, when there's a whole issue that's devoted to Mr. Miracle and his nightmares that he has about apocalypse, and at the end, Martian Manhunter steps in and mentions Oreo cookies because he has that Oreo cookie addiction. That was a humorous little thing, and that's like, playing in that sandbox similar to what Alan Moore does. And that's fun, but to have them be a constant element, I think would kind of ruin it. It got them out of the comics code thing. It allowed them to do more mature, because these books, for being when they came out, these are pretty serious comics. These 7 Alan Moore issues. There's some horrific stuff going on in there.
Not to mention the alcoholism and like
the Monkey King story is kind of weak. I mean, it's a horror story, but like there's some really terrible, like when you find out what the girl's secret is, with her father standing over her.
Yeah.
You don't have to tell.
The scene with any scene with Matt Cable, just downright oily, just makes you just want to crawl out of your skin. It's just.
He's an interesting character too, because he does, his character comes to a pretty gruesome and pretty finite end, but he comes back in Sandman in Raven form. Matthew the Raven in Sandman in his next that's Matthew Cable, and that's that. And when you know that and you read some of the Sandman issues and he makes comments about certain things, it sort of gels it together. So all of those books are so interconnected, and those are the books I read when I was coming up. Like when other people were reading, Secret Wars and things like that, which are phenomenal anyway, because of the people I knew in high school, I was reading, Swamp Thing and Hellblazer and Sandman, and further and further, and any of the spin-offs off of that, and the whole DC horror. And I still stand by, when people ask me why I'm more of a DC guy than a Marvel guy, this is why. Because Marvel would never publish a book like Saga and the Swamp Thing, like these Alan Moore books. They'd never do it. Even Man-Thing books don't go as far as this comic does. Right. And they're a blast, unless R.L. Stein writes them and they're terrible.
Right. Well, yeah. But the interesting thing about Saga the Swamp Thing, and I want to jump in here, is that this is a trend for Alan Moore, and especially Alan Moore of the 80s. Like, if you've ever read Saga the Swamp Thing, and then you go and you read some of his other books, like, say, Miracle Man, the fact that in England, they still had the rights, quote unquote, to Shazam. So at some point, like, Alan Moore took a stab at, basically writing a Shazam book and turned it on its head and wrote Miracle Man. Again, that's something that I can highly recommend that you read. But whether it's that or whether it's, again, eventually with Watchmen, what he does is he takes, like, basically Silver Age characters, whether it's, again, Shazam, Swamp Thing, Blue Beetle, or Captain Atom, or whatever you want to talk about, and then he transforms them, he changes them, he flips them on their head a little bit, and he says, you know what? You can tell some much more interesting stories just by changing 1 or 2 variables with these particular individuals and making them live in more of a realistic setting.
Yeah, which was the harsh realities of the day.
Yeah, nobody really was doing that. until Alan Moore kind of showed up and decided that's what he wanted to do. And
you're on the right path with that. It's like he's taking these superhero tropes everyone knows and loves and reads and is reused over and over again. And then he takes that and he uses that as almost like a looking glass. That's what he's doing with the Justice League here. He's using the Justice League as the mirror to, this is what you normally get with a comic. Here come the superheroes to save the day. And they can't, because it's not something that a superhero can do. It's not might makes right. It's not, faster than a speeding bullet. It's all these, pardon the pun, you have to get down into the swamp to fix. And if you look at what he's done with Watchmen, it's the same thing. It's showing you that, this superficiality of the superhero is just that. It's almost like, proto-Batman, that after so long, or James Bond, after killing so many people and bedding so many women, you end up with a hollow shell of a person just going through the motions because that's what they're told to do, or that's what everyone expects them to be.
Yeah. Watchmen is just basically the Charlton superhero characters just done through his lens. And Swamp characters have been around, since, the Heap and the old Airboy comics back in the 1940s. And they all have similar storylines. A person dies and the swamp takes them over and brings them back to life for whatever reason. If you want to, just to dip your feet into it, this is a great volume to do it with.
Sure.
So before I forget, we mentioned the Vertigo thing. Swamp Thing didn't carry the Vertigo imprint until issue 129. And it only ran to 171. So it really wasn't a Vertigo book for a very long time. But I can't remember when they dropped the comics code from it, though. It was earlier than that. As far as issue 90, it wasn't carrying. It had a suggested for mature readers note on there, wasn't it? But these 7 issues, I guess, or 6 issues, whatever, really kind of give you an idea of what's going to come. But it goes so much further. And before we started recording, Chad mentioned an issue where they do eventually fall in love with each other, and there's a scene where they do, to the best of their ability, have a romantic moment. It's all done through psychedelic tubers and basically eating a potato-like growth from his body. And it just goes so, and there's so much more body horror stuff. And then there's the occasional monster of the week kind of thing, but in a way that only really Alan Moore could do.
But you bring up a great point, or to piggyback off what you were saying, when Abby eats that tuber, it's a very different experience than when the Floronic Man eats one of those tubers.
Right.
It's all in what your purpose is, what your goal is. At the end of that story, when Swamp Thing is dressing down the Floronic Man, where he's like, you are hurting the Green. You think you're doing these things, getting rid of all these meat bags. You think that's the way to do things, but look at the destruction you're causing, as opposed to Abby, where she's more, embracing of that, and it's a more loving exchange, and, there's deep stuff here.
No, you bring up a great point with that notion of the Floronic Man, again, wanting to become, in tap with the Green and saying, I'm going to liberate all the plants, and we're going to kill all the animals and stuff like that. But, and the Swamp Thing rightly pointing out that him bringing violence to that particular world is at its core anti to that particular world. You can boil down the Floronic Man to that notion that those that want power probably shouldn't be the ones to hold power. He wants to be the main big head honcho of the Green, the big defender, the guy that's going to be on that wall. And you know what? He's not the right guy for it, because he wants the job so badly. He's willing to do whatever, and he's got an inferiority complex about that. He knows he's not the Swamp Thing. He knows he doesn't have a natural attachment. In fact, he has to use the Swamp Thing in order to get it. Yeah. And so, therefore, he's always going to be inferior to the genuine article, as it might say. And so, he's never going to be the proper representative of that movement. It's so universal, and Alan Moore taps into that.
Yeah.
And you'll never
the
really
plants need the animals too.
Yeah.
There's a certain balance, there's a certain cohesion in nature, certain roles that need to be played. And so people, they go so far to embrace one role, they forget about the others and the importance they have.
Yeah, as we said earlier, the symbiotic relationship, and that there's that great panel, that great scene where Swamp Thing is addressing the Floronic Man, and he goes, "And what will change the oxygen back into the gases that we need to survive when men and animals are dead?" And then there's that great art where it's like 6 little mini panels all cut up where you just to show the mind awakening within the Floronic Man, realizing, oh, maybe it wasn't such a good idea, my grand master plan.
And he's very much like Anton Arcane in that aspect. Anton Arcane's the same kind of idea where he wants this, dark magical power, and it just it eats you alive. But what's interesting is later on in the Swamp Thing books, Alec actually gets to almost to that same point as the Floronic Man does, where he feels the earth in such pain that he decides to fight against it. There's a few issues there where Alec almost becomes villainous somewhere along the line. I mean, there's so many Swamp Thing issues that they all start to jumble in my brain, so I don't know what volume it is or anything like that. But and the other thing that's interesting about the series as a whole is that the art in these issues for me was unlike anything I had ever seen at that time in my life as a young. Now, I didn't come to these when they were coming out. I read these when I was probably about like 16 or something. Like so like I don't know if Yates had done anything before these or and I have some Tarzan books that Yates did later on, and he's just amazing. But the books consistently have phenomenal artwork as well when the teams change, when artists come in and change. But you're right when you mentioned that the covers are very much still sort of throwbacky 1970s style covers too. And it almost tricks you into reading this book that is not what the cover indicates. I mean, it is. It's not like those covers. There was a while where covers just blatantly lied to you, and it didn't even, the cover indicated something that doesn't even happen in the book. I can't imagine being someone who was reading the book on a regular basis, reading those first few issues of Alan Moore's run and wondering what the hell was happening, because they are very different from what came before. What came before is worth noting, and I mentioned how I think it's kind of criminal how the first 19 issues of the book are seemingly ignored. Like this trade paperback is volume 1. It shouldn't be volume 1. It should be like volume 8. But it did hit its stride when Alan Moore took over, and that's when it was an event after that. It was like a
It's interesting that you bring up the art, because again, I want to really quickly talk to JA and to Chad. You're right that the Swamp Thing has always had fantastic artists working on the particular books. I mean, Bernie Wrightson was the guy that co-created with, and if you've never seen any Bernie Wrightson's Frankenstein stuff, it's just tremendous. But anyways,
and then when he left, it was like Nestor Redondo and guys like that.
So Chad, as somebody that enjoys good comic book art, what did you think of the art in this?
Oh, it's wonderful. I mean, I talked earlier about how Swamp Thing, just that visual of the monster, like, it's so unique, and in here it's so well done. Especially I go to one of the issues, the one with the Justice League comes in and they have the TV shots of the Floronic Man, and it looks like they were actual photographs. Like, it's so close to photorealism. Did they draw this? Is this real? Is this some guy in a costume? But it's not just the realism to it. There's a storytelling element there. I think the art in here is just... And we haven't gushed about it enough. Like, it's horrific when it needs to be horrific. It's emotional when you need it to be emotional. I love it.
I'm thinking about, from the anatomy lesson, there's this one great half-page panel where the Floronic Man is, working to figure out what's going on with Swamp Thing. And it's almost all black with just these little bits of, like, him with his head down, or him thinking, him holding up tubers, and papers are falling through the panel, and it's all of his thoughts jotted down, almost like it's a artistic representation of the notes and his thoughts at that moment while he's doing that investigative aspect. And it's just really, really well done. There's, you've got these little bits of him doing all these different things, and then it all fades into a giant half-page picture of his face thinking, and his mind is the Swamp Thing stuff. So you can see that Swamp Thing is on his mind. Oh,
yeah. That I really liked the issue when he's having his complete mental breakdown, and he's having all the dreams Like there's this one scene where like he's just being attacked by just horrific, grotesque things, and they're trying to steal his skeleton, and he's like, "This is all I've got left. Like this is my humanity." Like, and he's like trying to fight it. He's like, "I'll fight you all," and it's just so much power and emotion in some of these Swamp Thing panels that it's just hard not to enjoy it.
Oh, about that part, a lot of the beings in that imagery are from the first run from the 70s. So he's having memories of the past volume, which I think is pretty cool.
Very cool.
Oh, it's good stuff.
We will be right back with more Last Comic Shop right after these messages. We've got our rating for Saga of the Swamp Thing, Book 1, so stay tuned for that. Hopefully we won't get swamped in the meantime.
Nice.
Have you ever been reading through a stack of comics and thought, maybe I should see what this Arkham Asylum game is all about? Or been playing Marvel vs. Capcom and felt like you were at a real disadvantage because you didn't know who half the characters were? Well, Play Comics is the show for you. I'm Chris, and each episode takes a look at video games based on comic properties and how well they stick to the source material. So whether you know the comics and want to know how these games work, or know the games and want to find out where all this craziness came from, go check out Play Comics at playcomics.com, the Brain Trust Network, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts.
Hey everybody, this is Nerd Bomber here, one of the co-hosts of the Online Warriors podcast. Our weekly podcast started as a way for three friends to keep in touch and discuss their passion for movies, gaming, technology, and entertainment. And since then, we've grown into a fantastic online community. Every Wednesday, we release a new episode discussing the latest nerdy news, and then we go hands-on with our weekly adventures and a fun trivia show. Sound interesting? Check us out on every podcast platform, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or hit us up at onlinewarriorspodcast.com.
All right, we're back with more of the Last Comic Shop, and it is now time for our ratings, where we have the audacity to rate an Alan Moore book. Some people would call this blasphemy, but you know, and not everything that Alan Moore has written has been the best. I think we could all probably go around and at least say there was one thing that Alan Moore wrote that we were like, meh, it's not so great.
Lost Girls.
Yes, there's that. I'm not a huge fan of, the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, 1969?
Yeah, Volume 3 and beyond on League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. It just loses me.
I don't like it. I don't. Yeah, whatever. We're not here to talk about League of Extraordinary Gentlemen 1969.
I mean, I don't know what the hell's going on in it, but I like it.
You know. It's no top 10, sir.
Oh, sir. Top 10 is so good. Oh, all right. Anyway.
Well, what we are saying is whether we think this particular book 1 of Saga of the Swamp Thing is good or bad. And we're going to do it as we always do on a 1 out of 4 scale. And as always, my cousin J.A. Scott likes to give us some fun way to grade our book this particular week. So what fun way are we going to grade this Alan Moore treasure?
Wow. It's Swamp Thing, so we're in the swamp. It only makes sense that we're rating it as 1 out of 4 vines.
Vines? I don't even know what that is. What kind of sound is like the licorice?
Yeah, like a vine, a vine from a tree.
You couldn't go like alligators? You couldn't go like, I don't know, those things that they ride around in, the
hovercraft.
The hovercrafts, yeah. You couldn't go hovercraft. You went with vine. That's not even the thing that's the most preferable in the jungle. Like, you couldn't say rotten logs. Never mind. Anyways, how many vines are you giving this particular book this week, J.A.? It was your pick, after all.
I'm going to give it 3 vines, 3 out of 4. I really liked it. I really liked the Floronic Man run. So the retconning of Swamp Thing up through Floronic Man going crazy and trying to kill the world. I really appreciated that. The next story, the Monkey King story, very demonic type story. I think had I continued to read the run, I probably would have enjoyed that more because it would have felt like it fit in more. But just in terms of this saga that we read, these 8 issues, retcon origin story of the Swamp Thing and the Floronic Man arc. The Monkey King is like, well, we've got to add another story so we can pad out this book and sell it for $20.
Right. I can see where you're going with that. You kind of do switch tracks a little bit after that Floronic Man. So yeah, three vines for you. Okay. Chad, what is your grade for this particular Saga of the Swamp Thing?
I don't know. Initially, I was going to go higher because 80s Alan Moore is hard to beat. And I think there's some 90s Alan Moore, 2000s Alan Moore where he goes off the rails a little bit. But back in the 80s, like, he touched into the collective unconscious, like I said earlier. I don't know. The art is fantastic. Sometimes it's revelatory. I don't mind the Monkey Man story as much as you guys did. I thought it was very scary. I thought it was very creepy. I thought, it fit the horror ethos of the series. I didn't think it was as good, but I didn't think it was bad or terrible or, shouldn't be deducted in any way. But, I don't know, maybe I should. So I'm going to say 3.75 vines. But I just love the whole concept. And I wanted to go back to one page that we didn't bring up where Swamp Thing was there. And he's like, listen, you guys, you wouldn't let me be a human, so I became a monster. And then you wouldn't let me be a monster, so I became a plant. And now, you guys won't let me be a plant! I'm like, poor Swamp Thing. He just wants a thing to be. It's like the old school Hulk. Let him be a plant.
Very cool. All right, Mikey, what's your rating for this particular book?
I mean, man, I gotta go with the 4, man. I have to. It's read the next issue. Andrew, read the next issue, and I think you'll keep wanting to go, because the next issue is called The Burial, and it ties into the anatomy lesson very well. Like, just do it. Just keep going. It's just so good. It's so good. So that's 4 vines for me.
Wow. I will say this, that I might read some more Swamp Thing. Maybe you've converted me. I don't know, Mikey Wood. I know that I know eventually somewhere along the lines, like, he swaps places with John Constantine so that he can have sex with Abigail, which just seems like a weird threesome. And I don't know, that just seems icky to me. I might not go there as far as that. But I think that's why I'm going to give this particular book a 3, because I will be very honest, because the anatomy lesson by far, that's like a 10. That's like one of the greatest issues of comic books ever, like single issues. I've said that already. And the rest of that Floronic Man story is just as good. Like, it hits a peak and it just doesn't come down for another 4 issues. So for that, it's like that's easily a 4. But then in this particular book, you get those Monkey Man issues, which aren't as good. But that's like kind of like that's a mountaintop, and anything else is just going to be a hill. But unfortunately, that hill is in this collection, and you're just kind of like, yeah, maybe I should have just stopped with 5 issues and just jumped off. And so there's like that inevitable letdown. I'm sorry to say, as a reader, there's an inevitable letdown with the Monkey Man. Nothing can compare to those 5 issues. So you're kind of just like, anything. Doesn't matter what the story is going to be. It's not going to be as good.
Yeah, but that story is almost like it gives you a break for a second from all the like the story prior to that, the Floronic Man story and all that. It was just heavy. And then so you have a monster story, and then it goes on to more heavy. So I look at that as sort of like a breather.
Right, I could see that. A palate cleanser.
Yeah.
Just reset, getting you back, just getting you a couple issues. This collection, if I'm grading the book, like book 1 of Saga the Swamp Thing, it would be a 4 if it was just those 5 issues and nothing else. Like, if they should have stopped at that and then put whatever else is in the rest of it. But they didn't. They did what they did. And so that's why it's a 3. But one thing that you could always get on our particular program is recommendations. That is where we give you other books other than the Saga of the Swamp Thing that you should pick up at your local comic book shop. And as always on this show, we like to do a similar book, a current book, and a book out of left field. But we also, when we have wonderful guests like the great and talented Mikey Wood, we like to do a cherry on the top. So this week we're going to start off with our current book, and that goes to my co-host Chad. So Chad, what's our current book that they should pick up at a local comic book shop today?
Well, if you're a fan of the Swamp Thing, why not try Future State Swamp Thing? Yay, it was only 2 issues. It was written by Ram V with art by Mike Perkins. Is it Ram V? Is it Ram 5? I don't know. We'll go with the V. But anyway, this is the story. It touches on so much of what we think of whenever we think of Swamp Thing. He ends up with a little Swamp Thing family. He has his daughter that he's going around with, and there are sacrifices to be made for the sake of humanity, and it's not just the green, but how things fit in. And I don't know, I feel like if you are a fan of Swamp Thing and all of the classic Swamp Thingy tropes, that this story is another one that it'll scratch that itch for you. All while serving as part of DC's post-apocalyptic future state saga. So it's definitely worth it. It's only 2 issues. It's worth checking out.
All right, I'll go next, and I've got the similar book for today's broadcast. And for me, I'm picking a trade paperback that you can get, which is called DC Universe, The Stories of Alan Moore. And it is really a collection of a lot of the early DC comics that Alan Moore wrote about the same time as this Saga, the Swamp Thing. And boy, oh boy, are there some gems in this particular collection. Really, when you talk about some of the best Alan Moore stuff from DC, this book's got it. You get For the Man That Has Everything, which is all about Superman and getting his greatest wish, which is just to be a normal guy on Krypton. But really super good. Not only that, but you also get the tremendous Whatever Happened to the Man from Tomorrow, which basically ends the original Superman run at DC Comics before John Byrne came in and rebooted it with Man of Steel. So it's basically Alan Moore kind of putting kind of a closer on all of that Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age kind of wonky stuff that happened with Superman run. So you get that story, you get Killing Joke, obviously, but then you get some really neat little tiny kind of side stories. One that I really, really love is a story called Footsteps, which comes from Secret Origins number 10, which kind of tells the story of who the Phantom Stranger is, in that he was a fallen angel that decided not to side with neither heaven nor hell in the big battle between the god and the devil, and was basically cast out of both places. Like neither place wanted him because he wouldn't pick a side, and how he's had to pay for that ever since. And there's also a neat Swamp Thing story in here, which is all about basically Superman going crazy, getting infected by some sort of strange Kryptonian fungus, and how Swamp Thing has to talk him down. Pretty much what he is, like he's high as a kite or whatever. In any case, great stuff. It's called DC Universe's The Stories of Alan Moore. Can't recommend it enough. J.A., what's your out of left field pick this week?
All right, so out of left field, it was kind of feeling the setting of the Swamp Thing. We're in the South, we're in Louisiana, and it reminded me of a book that I read back in the middle 90s by Steve Ditko, Steve Englehart, Bob Hall, David Latham, Jim Shooter. And when you think of Jim Shooter mid-90s, it must be Valiant. So it is Shadow Man, the first 7 issues of the Shadow Man series. As I said, a lot of great writers and artists worked on that book. Story of this jazz musician who nearly dies and comes back possessed by a voodoo spirit, and it deals sort of with dark mysticism and New Orleans, and it's just you can get it in a trade called Valiant Masters Shadow Man Volume 1. Shadow Man is not one of the old Gold Key comic characters, so it was redone a couple years afterwards. And Mikey Wood, I believe you had some comments on that the next Shadow Man series is also quite good.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, I want to say, was that Acclaim? I don't think it was always Acclaim when it first came out, but they started a new run of it, and it was really good. I know Ashley Wood did the artwork for the first batch of issues, and those are the ones I have. I didn't read the volume that you have. I started reading after because I was into Ashley Wood because he had the same last name as me. It was a really cool run, and there was actually a Sega Genesis, not Genesis, I'm sorry, Sony PlayStation video game based off of that run. And that's a fun game, too. So, Shadow Man's cool, man. That's a good choice.
It's one of the few comic books that Aerosmith appears in. I still remember that comic book cover where Shadow Man's up on stage and he's like, I don't know, he's in like a sleeveless T-shirt and he's like, "What are you doing up here, Steve Tyler?" And great stuff. Anyways, what's your cherry on the top this week, Mikey?
Well, since we're talking about swamp characters, I think I'm going to suggest the swamp character from the Marvel run, just to show that I'm not sour grapesy and anti-Marvel. But it's technically Man-Thing Volume 3, I believe. It only ran 8 issues. It was 1997 and 1998, and it was written by J.M. DeMatteis and illustrated by Liam Sharp. And so it was cut short at issue 8, but the story continues in 2 issues of a new Strange Tale book that only ran, it was supposed to run 4 issues, but 3 and 4 never came out. So I did just tweet while you were talking, I tweeted J.M. DeMatteis and asked him if he has any PDFs of issues 3 and 4, just so that I could read them, just in case, they might be out there. But
weren't these Strange Tales though? Anyway, I know what run you're talking about.
Basically, riding off of the success of Vertigo is really what it was. Marvel tried to bring out Vertigo-esque books under a Strange Tales banner. So it was Man-Thing, Werewolf by Night, and there was another one. I can't remember what it was. They tried to wrap the stories up in Strange Tales, but again, they left them dangling there. And apparently the stories briefly summarized in Peter Parker Spider-Man Annual 99. So if you guys have that wraps up the story in that. But yeah, Strange Tales was like a subtitle for a while.
All right, well, that's all the time we had for the Last Comic Shop this week. As always, we were joined by the terrific Mikey Wood for another wonderful show. And Mikey, you are a talented comic book creator in your own right. Where can people find your wonderful stuff?
You can order 2 of my graphic novels off of Amazon. There's Hate Your Friends, which I did with Kristen Blank. And there is Pack of Lies, which I wrote and drew some chapters of, and other chapters are written by lots of local Pittsburgh artists. And it's a wonderful book. Those are on Amazon. So if you look up, Pack of Lies, Mikey Wood or something, it'll pop up there. El Phantasma is my luchador monster fighting guy. That's available on Graphite. And actually, before I forget, I want to kind of give a shout out to a really good Swamp Thing website that I have absolutely nothing to do with. I just think it's magnificent. It's rootsoftheswampthing.com. They have a really cool fanzine, which they actually publish on paper, and it's great. It's the Holland Files. The guy loves Swamp Thing more than I do, and it's magnificent. So, but yeah, give that a shot.
Yeah, definitely check out that website. And while you're out there surfing the web, make sure that you go over to www.lastcomicshoppodcast.com. It is our fantastic little website where we don't have much to do with Swamp Thing other than this episode, but you can get all kinds of great comic book reviews every single week here on the podcast. You can rate, review, and subscribe to all those terrific outlets like Apple Podcasts and Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, YouTube, Amazon Podcasts, all those great places. So make sure that you, again, rate, review, and subscribe. Leave us some good comments. That we love that stuff. And we will give you a shout out on all of our social media if you do. Well, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. You leave us good comments, we'll make sure that you get a shout out.
Not to beg too much. It'll help get the word out there.
Right. And what's another way that people can get the word out there about our fantastic podcast by going out to our website, J.A.?
Well, they can buy some merch and wear it on the street. And hey, if you're down with the green, you can get it in a green t-shirt.
That's right. Just in time for Earth Day next week. You can show up with either your browns or your greens or your jungle camo. I don't know if we have jungle camo, but yeah, there's a lot of great items available at our shop.
You can wear it with your Captain Planet hat.
Oh my goodness.
Right.
Have you guys seen, this is apropos of nothing, Funny or Die did a Captain Planet reboot?
Yes, with Don Cheadle.
Don Cheadle, yes, you have to check it out. Just not when the kids are around.
And not for nothing, the Swamp Thing series that ran on DC streaming and then the CW is really, really good. very lovingly adapted from the Alan Moore runs of the books in it, and it's so good. The USA Network Swamp Thing show is not, but I love it for different reasons altogether.
All right. Well, in any case, until next week, make sure that all of you stay safe, stay sheltered, and make sure that you do not bring your evil here, because the Swamp Thing will be after you. That's the truth. He's amazing.
I'm going to go eat a veggie pizza.
Nice. That's a good idea.
With tubers? Make sure
Tubers.
Look out for those tubers.
The Last Comic Shop was a 2021 Black Angus production.